Let me kick it off with a little bit about myself. My name is Apurva Garware. I'm currently Director of Product Management at Chegg. I've been here for about 6 months now. What brought me to Chegg was really a long time desire to make an impact in the field of education. We cater to high school and college students primarily in the US, and we help them do their homework better, ace their classes, feel confident, save money, save time, and be prepared for what lies next. So that's what my role at Chegg is about. I lead a team of PMs that's spread across Santa Clara, Israel, and India. And so a lot of what I'm going to share with you all today is about what I look for when I hire a new person to my team, but also how I help the PMs on my team learn and grow. I come from a background in computer science. I studied engineering back home in India, went to grad school here, pretty typical Indian story, and then spent about 5 years doing engineering. Had a blast while doing that and learned a lot of important lessons along the way. And 5 years in, I decided to go get my MBA and also transition into product in my company, which was Microsoft at the time. I've been very fortunate to have very strong mentors and very supportive leaders and managers along the way that have only encouraged me to explore transitions and what I wanted to do with my career. So made the transition into product and have worked currently at Chegg, but worked at Quora, BDM, Amazon, Microsoft along the way. So lots of fun stories to share today. And my journey has taken me from Mumbai to Pittsburgh, where I did my grad school, then to Seattle, where I was at Microsoft, and then I came here to the Bay Area. I also go by another name and another moniker. Most importantly, I'm mother of a little dragon and yet another Game of Thrones victim. So let's throw some stories in as we go today. So I wanted to share a little bit more about my story and what brought me to product. And that might help most of you guys here who are hoping to make the transition into product and even learn about whether it's the right thing for you to do or not. As I mentioned, I started my career as an engineer, and when I was an engineer, I was working on very different kinds of problems. I was a distributed systems engineer, so very large-scale back-end distributed problems. And so needless to say, the transition to being a customer-facing product manager was a pretty long one with a lot of different journeys along the way. What made me consider this journey in the first place was about 5 years into my career, I asked myself if I saw myself doing what my manager was doing. And he's a great guy, and I really respect him even today. But I also found myself missing the cross-functional impact that I saw other product managers have, or the ability to sit on user research studies that I saw my design counterparts have, or just constantly ask why we're doing what we're doing that I saw a lot of people in the business world have. And so I asked myself if I could take my manager's job in 5 years. The answer was a no, because I didn't see him do any of that. This was about 10 years back in Seattle, and product wasn't as well entrenched and as well known as it is today. So I really only had LinkedIn to do my research. And I didn't know where to begin. I didn't even know there was something called product. So what I did instead is I asked myself, where do I see myself going a few years from now, if not my manager's job? And the answer always came back as wanting to explore my own venture in a cause that's special to me. So knowing that that's what I wanted to do several years down the line, be a CEO of my own little company, I worked backwards from there and started researching profiles on LinkedIn to see CEOs of well-respected tech companies, big and small, what kind of career paths did they take. And as I did more research, I found product management become the common theme. A lot of people, whether they were from finance or consulting or UX design or even sometimes teaching backgrounds, were stumbling into this field, enjoying it, loving it, growing within it, and then eventually starting out and doing their own thing. And so that's how I learned about it. And as I mentioned, I was fortunate to be backed by a manager who encouraged me to actually move within the company, within Microsoft, to a team in the Bay Area, and then be coached by product people in the team. And so that's how I made my foray into product. The reason I'm sharing this is because the vast majority of this room, it sounded like, is exploring product as a career. And very often you may or may not even know if that's the right thing for you to do. But I encourage you to think about where you want to go a few years from now and work backwards from there and see whether product will give you the kind of skills that you're craving to have. That's probably a good way for you to decide if product is for you or not. So I'll stop there, and I would like to now segue into what this session is about, which is the 3 Ps of product management: product, process, and people. When I was contacted for this talk, I spent some time thinking about what topic to pick. And as I reflected on my 8 years or so of product management now, these are the 3 themes that stand out to me as being really critical to build as you take on a product role, whether it's early or whether it's late in your career. It really comes down to how well you master these 3 skills, and as you grow senior, how you balance the mix of them. And so I thought it would be a good topic to discuss with you all today. And with that said, let's start with the first P, which is product. When I say product, I usually am referring to how well you as a product manager are able to understand your end user and put yourself in their shoes, ask yourself and your team the right questions, and use that to prioritize the right problems. It also comes down to advocating for a really good user experience. When I talk about people, I'm talking about the ability to energize and mobilize your very cross-functional teams. As a product person, you usually don't have direct authority over people. You have to learn to get things done through influence and impact. And a lot about that is leading, resolving conflict, motivating and energizing people through the power of words and through the power of dreams. And then there's process. Process in my lens is about communicating, about prioritizing, about making sure things are really coming together. And did I say communicating? So communication is probably by far the most important skill to have as a product manager, and I'll go into that in a bit. When I think of some of the best designed products in our industry or even in other industry, the common theme I find across any product is, or any well-designed or well-respected product, is that these 4 questions have been answered very well, to the point that someone who's not even familiar with the product is able to connect the dots and answer these questions on the fly. Who is your user? What problem are we solving? Why is it important to solve? And how do we solve it? 4 simple questions, and if you need to take away one thing from today's talk, I would ask you to memorize these 4. It's for those of you who already decided to interview as product managers. You apply this simple framework in any of your conversations or your interviews, and I'd be surprised if it didn't go well. So let's dwell on each one for a bit. Who is the user? So this question is really a proxy for taking a step back and asking yourself the bigger questions, which is, if you are in, let's say, e-commerce for apparel, what's the segment that you want to target? Is it millennials? Is it older working professionals? And if it is one or the other, within that demographic, are you going after the spendthrifts? Are you going after the budget conscious users? Who is it that you're going after? And as you ask yourself who the user is, you will identify a niche segment that is either not capitalized or has a lot of players but still presents an opportunity for you to step in and differentiate. So to go back, I think this question really forces you to take a step back and look at the larger picture and whether the segment that you're focusing on presents the kind of opportunity that you want to go after. In asking yourself this question, you'll also ask yourself, what is the TAM, the total addressable market? What's the SAM, which is the serviceable addressable market? And what is the current market penetration? And in asking yourself these three questions, you'll find yourself a niche that you want to focus on. What problem are we solving? Way too often I've seen PMs flounder and fail because they jump into coming up with a solution before they find what the problems are. It's a pattern I've seen time and again, and it's also a pattern that isn't isolated to any one level of seniority within product. You'd see the most junior but also the most senior people sometimes make this mistake. It's so critical to understand what problems you're trying to solve and prioritize them. You cannot go after every opportunity. You're going to boil the ocean and you're going to lose focus, you're going to waste resources, and you're going to be back to square one. What you would get the most out of is making sure that you're focused on the right problem which presents the right opportunity and then designing a solution for it. Which brings us to the next question, which is, why is it important to solve? Let's face it, each of us wants to go into work every day and feel a strong sense of self-worth. We want to know why we are doing the work we're doing. We want to be able to tie it back to the mission of the companies we work at. And we want to know that at the end of the day, we are making an impact. And this question forces us to ask ourselves that. How is this relevant to the mission of our company? And more importantly, what's our hypothesis? If we do X, then what's going to happen is Y, which will create an impact on Z. That's the kind of hypothesis statement I love to see in asking ourselves, why is this important to solve? And then last but not the least, and the most exciting, is how you want to solve it. And this is where the drums start to roll and the teams start to come together, and you're going to do design sprints and get UX involved and get engineers involved. And it's exciting, and I've been through numerous such sprints and fun times designing solutions, but wait until you ask yourself these questions because you're going to end up otherwise with some throwaway effort. The nice thing about this framework is no matter how small or how large the complexity of a product, if you ask yourselves these 4 questions, you're going to find the answers emerge, and you're going to find that the most respected products have a clear answer for all 4. Let's start with Instacart, which today has a $7.5 billion valuation and was founded in 2010, so about 9 years back. If you listen to stories or podcasts by Puro Mehta, share a name, no coincidence why I picked this, you'll find that he identified or he related to the users in the grocery stores who were experiencing the problem of long lines, tiring Sunday evenings, lack of time, bad weather, having to move things across car trunks. So the hypothesis, presumably, that he came up with is giving customers back invaluable time that's otherwise spent shopping will drive a willingness to pay of $15 a month, which is what the Instacart Express membership is. I paid this every month for the past 4 years till Prime came over and bought Whole Foods and everything changed. But it's clear to see how this hypothesis played out and how this company has been able to carve a niche even in the space of fierce competition from the Amazons of the world. And finding the solution, if you play around with the app, you know what I'm talking about, but it's painless, it's frictionless to use the app. Browse, chat, check out, search, add to cart, all of them very fluid, very easy to use, very intuitive. So let's zoom in into a specific feature. So that was a higher level product, which I think lends itself to the 4 questions. Any Quip users here? Okay, so Quip is a note-taking or a productivity app similar to the Google Docs or the Microsoft Words of the world. But anyone that's used it, and I encourage you all to do that because it's just so easy to use, will identify this with this. The user in the case of Quip is the enterprise user. Typically small to medium-sized businesses that don't have as much bureaucracy or constraints around what needs to be shared. Uh, the problem when I was using Quip, it was clear, is how comments are tracked in Google or Microsoft Word docs, which are alternatives to using Quip. Um, Comments are hard to follow along, hard to resolve. It's hard to have a conversation around comments and then keep everyone updated as things get resolved. If you take a step back to Quip's mission, it's to build a new class of productivity tools that every person at every company enjoys using every single day. And it's clear to see how something like this does that. You can go in and comment, you can tag people, you can resolve threads, you can actually have an entire conversation. You can also control who sees what pretty easily. So the reason I brought these two examples along is Instacart is a great example of a product or a company that's done really successfully, and just by looking at the product, you can ask and answer the 4 questions that we started out with. And even if we zoom into something as finely designed as comments and tagging on a Quip document, the same 4 questions can be applied and the answers are self-explanatory. So let's move on to process. Of the 3 Ps, all the product managers I talked to like this one the least. And one of the reasons is, as product managers, we go to a lot of lengths to explain that we are product managers. We're not process or project or program managers. And while I appreciate that distinction, I think oftentimes the value of process and just general organizational skills is very underrated in product management. I consider process synonymous with communication. And the reason why is whether it's explicit communication, like where you're speaking or you're writing an email, or whether it's an implicit form of communication where you're maintaining a prioritized backlog. In either case, following a process helps you communicate broadly with people that you may not have a chance to sit next to and explain things to. And in my time as a PM, I've seen that on the spectrum of seniority, junior product managers, or those who enter the field newly, are the ones that tend to do more process heavy work. And as you grow more senior in your career, you probably index more on product and less on process. But the most successful senior people I've seen in product management are the ones that have nailed their process and either been able to delegate it or automate it so that they don't have to worry about it anymore and they can shift their thinking to the bigger bets. That's the journey I've seen be most successful, because conversely, if you are a very senior product manager whose head is always in the clouds and who's always thinking of the big ideas but who cannot deliver and who cannot execute, you're not going to get credibility. So my advice to those of you who are entering this field new is don't undervalue or don't underestimate the importance of process, because process helps you become a better communicator. And as you build on that chop, you can then grow more senior in your career and think about bigger bets. Great example of how you think what you didn't recommend is actually what someone takes away. My favorite. So I wanted to touch upon why I think process is important. First off, alignment, where you're working as a product manager with a very broad set of stakeholders across various functions and fields. And to align them on the goals and on the problems, you need a framework, and I'll talk about frameworks in a bit, that helps everyone walk away with the same picture. Motivation, as you'll see in one of the tools I described, I think of using briefs, product briefs, or product requirement documents as a way to motivate the team and inspire them about where you want to take the product, if not in the short term, then in the long term. And the written frameworks around communication always assist with that. Transparency, where you want everyone to be on the same page, you want to be open about things that you're doing. The best way to do that, in my opinion, is keeping things organized, communicating them often. Accountability, where you make sure people are signing up for what they need to. Resolution, when there's conflict or when there's open issues. And building trust. Doing all of the above really helps you build trust with your colleagues. So I'm going to touch on three quick frameworks. The first one's around meetings, the second one's around tools, and the third one is around goals. So that all of those three ladder into the process E of our doctorate. So let's start with meetings. Now, full disclaimer that this is something that has worked really well for me in different companies I've worked at. So it may or may not apply to you. So I've looked at a horizon of an entire year. So we have that view in mind. And what I've called out is the things in green are, in my opinion, sort of one-time, heavier, high investment strategic activities. And then the things in white are execution and staying on top of things, so more recurring activities. I also have them interspersed, but that doesn't mean that a monthly KPI only happens between Jan and April. It just means everything in white is things that happen at the cadence I've mentioned, so either on a monthly or a bi-weekly basis throughout the year. And then the things in green happen just one-off at the points I've called out. So let's start with the activities in green. I believe in planning in 6-month chunks because planning is an expensive affair. It means going back, doing some of the data research you asked about, getting people aligned, negotiating things, problems to solve, goals to take. It's expensive. And I think it's important that we know where we are going as a team at least twice a year. For example, at Chegg, we are a very seasonal business, and we need to make sure that we plan in semesters, so that's aligned with our business model as well. But this may or may not work for every company. So I want to just say that at the outset that our cadence works well with this because we reflect the school semesters. So we do planning at the start of the year for the first 6 months. And then in 3 months, I like to take a look back and say like, here's how we did so far in Q1, here's where we are going in Q2. So between Jan and June, the roadmap is pretty much set. But when we check in April, it's just a way to calibrate and make sure things are going as expected and we don't need to change anything in a big way. Let's move into the white ones. And as I mentioned, they're sprinkled throughout the year. So KPI syncs. I really like to believe that we need to keep an eye on the health of our business at a regular cadence. In some companies I've worked at, the KPI syncs happen on a weekly basis. Monday mornings, you kick off with a sync with all the leaders in the room and you look at your metrics. In other companies, you cannot really do a week-by-week check-in because it's going to be way too noisy, so we do it on a bi-weekly or a monthly basis. So it really depends on what works for you. But at least a monthly is what I would say. And this sync is a forum where whoever leads KPIs in your company would lead that sync. I don't have product lead the sync for a very specific reason. And the reason is product managers are not building the dashboards. Sometimes there are data anomalies. Sometimes there are business patterns that influence what the KPIs look like. And I don't want there to be any bias into the reports that we share. So I have someone unbiased who is in some cases the head of business analytics, some cases the head of data science, one person who's on point to share a readout of what our business metrics look like, but product is on point in those conversations to come up with hypotheses if something is not looking the way we expected it to.
So what are the basic KPIs?
It really depends on your business, right? So if you are a consumer internet company and you're responsible for a product that is driving growth, you could be looking at, for example, your SEO metrics. You could be looking at your conversion rates. You could be looking at your activation rates. But if you are a product that is less catering to growth and more catering to like people that have already signed up and subscribed, then you could be looking at retention rates, engagement rates, time on site. So it really depends on what your business is, and of course if you're an enterprise product then it's very different because things are likely not going to change that much on a month-to-month or a week-to-week basis. So the next one in white is the bi-weekly roadmap sync. Note that I have called out the monthly KPI sync separate from the bi-weekly roadmap sync, and there's again a specific reason for this. The roadmap sync is to make sure that we are executing well against our plan. If there are risks, if there are dependencies, if there are blockers, those get called out. You could choose to couple the two, up to you, but I find that decoupling them actually preserves focus on the two different aspects of our product. The first being around the health of the business, the second being around the health of our execution. And so I typically spread it out, and in some cases it makes sense to meet for the roadmap sync more often than it does for the KPI sync. And then lastly, I have the biweekly A/B test readout. Now, that again, in my opinion, is healthiest when it's run by a data scientist or someone that understands statistics and significance and all of the goodness around data science models. And so I usually recommend that a data science leader is the one that runs these readouts and comes with a recommendation on whether we should launch or not. That said, before every A/B test gets launched, I really encourage product managers to define the hypothesis and the launch criteria, which is what are we trying to test and what do we expect will happen, and if this plays out, what are the metrics we expect will move, and what are the metrics we expect will either be do no harm or neutral. I think the combination of these meetings will basically get you into a solid execution cadence. It sounds like a lot, but one tip or one piece of advice is deciding and defining who needs to be in each of these things. If you have everyone attend every one of these, there's going to be chaos. So if you are a leader of product, or even if you're a product manager, work with your lead of product to define what the audience needs to be in each of these, and as long as it's not overlapping and repetitive, you'll find you get a lot done with these 6 or 7 meetings. Okay, so this is the second component of the process fee. Tools that I use or have used, 3 buckets, 1 for KPI tracking, 2 for briefs, and 3 for task management. I'm not attached to any one tool. I've worked and the ones I've listed here and many others are pretty best in class, and today the bar is pretty high for these tools to be used anyway. KPI tracking, combination of mixed panel or Domo dashboards. I've also used Looker in the past, where you can actually use Looker to construct your own queries, build your own custom dashboards, and then tweak them as needed. On product briefs, I use Confluence pretty heavily. I like Confluence because it's very transparent and visible, and you don't have to worry about document level settings on privacy. So if transparency is one of your company's values, heavily encourage the use of it. But Quip and Paper have worked pretty well for me in the past as well. They just don't allow for the same kind of navigation experience as Confluence does, but they have great collaboration features and great multimedia features that I've enjoyed using. And then for task management, currently we use Jira, but I've also used Asana, Trello in the past. I really like Trello, very visual, very lightweight, makes things very easy to manage on a sprint by sprint basis. But any one of these, and I'm sure this is not a comprehensive list, works pretty well.
Have you used anything like AHA for like just roadmap management? AHA. It's like
Unfortunately, I haven't.
How do you do like roadmaps and just managing?
Where we manage them?
Yeah.
Well, typically in the initial phases when we're getting consensus, I use like a PowerPoint or a document which has limited visibility, because you don't want to randomize the team. But at the point when things are set and a roadmap is defined, Confluence is the way for me, where it's then available to anyone and everyone to see and view. All right. So I mentioned a little earlier about a framework for goals and initiatives. So this is the third component of the process P. So again, this is illustrative only, take it or leave it depending on how it applies to you. But this is an example of, the goals are an example of what I would give to my team at the start of a half planning. And this table is an example of a table they would come back with obviously more than one row, but is what they would come back with aligned with these goals. So let's start with the goals. I've called out 3 example goals to call out 3 types of goals that I like to encourage taking. The first is a very, as you can see, a very numeric or a business driven goal, where you have to meet a certain forecast or you have to penetrate a certain market, and you need to attach Firstly, you need to define if members is your KPI or if it's some other KPI, and then what the numeric target for that is in working with your business partners. Have a date against it. The main recommendation on this first one is define your North Star KPIs. Make sure that independent of how many PMs you have, how many teams you have, your company has a single North Star KPI, your team has a single North Star KPI. And then each one of you or each one of the teams within or sub-teams within can then work on KPIs that ladder into the North Star KPI. But having a single North Star KPI that everyone clearly understands is critical to the success of your teams and your company. The second goal I have here is an example of a case where you might be doing something for strategic reasons, not so much for immediate gratification on your North Star KPI. So launching a service in some markets by a certain date. Your hypothesis is that if you did this launch, you would probably get some long-term payout, which presumably would accrue members. But for the short term or for the 7 months between now and then, you won't see that impact. And so your success is defined in terms of your ability to penetrate that market. The third example I have here is what we talked about a little earlier, where you don't really have a baseline. You're launching a V1 product for the very first time, and success is defined by getting an MVP out, doing your user research, and hearing that this is what users want to use, and there's a need for something like this. So in this case, success is not related to your business metrics. It's not related to market penetration. It's about defining a scrappy MVP that you can get out there, get feedback on, validate some hypothesis, rinse, repeat. Great. So when you set goals for your team, they take these, they go back into their teams, they do their brainstorms, and then they come back. And when they come back, they present a table which has all their hypotheses listed out. And in that first pass, they've not done any opportunity sizing. They're just saying the impact would be high, medium, low. The investment would be this high, medium, low, and then here's our confidence level on hitting. The legend here is high, medium, low. Now, they would need to say, and they would need to be able to defend whether it's high against the first, second, or third goal. So they should be able to do that. And in some cases, it's high impact on our numbers. In other cases, it's high impact because we have great learnings. In any case, they need to be able to defend why it's a high, medium, or low. Investment, this is where I usually get a lot of pushback because it's difficult for engineers or designers to say how much time is going to be needed. Right, it's fair, but we need to all be scrappy, and we also need to work with swag costs and put a stick in the ground somewhere. And so my recommendation is let's have buckets. Let's say high maps to 8+ weeks of work and small low maps to like 2 weeks of work. And just based on past experience, how would you slot effort into this? I usually work with an engineering leader to do this exercise rather than individual engineers, because they are able to understand and based on their past experience make better swags than engineers could. I also don't like to randomize a team of engineers to do this exercise. So I work with my engineering leader partners to get this together. And confidence is one I didn't have until recently, until my business partner actually mentioned it's important, because you could have something that's super high impact, super low investment, but it's very, very risky just because we don't know or because the hypothesis isn't strong enough. And so this is an important third leg of the stool, which is important to know whether this hypothesis is set up to succeed or fail. All right, so that brings us to the third P, which is people. I want to do a quick round the room here and get your input. When I say people, what are the things you think I'm referring to? Because we've already touched on so much of that that I want to see if you all think it's the same or it's different. What are the people skills you think product managers need to have?
Communication.
Sure. Okay.
Think big.
Think big. Okay.
Likability.
Sorry?
Likability.
Likability. Okay.
Empathy.
Leadership. Okay.
Negotiation.
Okay.
Communication.
What's that?
Clarity of vision.
Clarity of vision. Okay, so I heard communication a lot. I heard likability, negotiations, all great points. Maybe another way of asking this question is, who are all the people that are important to a product manager?
People who can get the stuff done.
But I mean actual functional people.
Engineers.
Engineers, okay.
Testers.
Testers, designers,
Designer,
Marketing.
analyst,
marketing,
data science,
data science,
Customers.
customers.
Yes.
Okay, so I think the answer is
The whole
emerging. What's that?
The whole team.
The whole team, yeah? You guys have the answers in your head. This is probably by far the hardest skill to build for a product manager. And especially for, sorry?
It's called interpersonal communication.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of the things which I would say can either make or break your ability to be a product manager. Someone can have great vision, but if they don't, they can build on it. Someone can have great process skills, but if they don't, they can learn or they can use the right tools and they need it. But unless you appreciate the importance of working with a team of very different functions, each of which has very different incentives and goals and motivations, your success or your possibility to succeed as a PM can be pretty limited. It's also, again, one of the more undervalued skills. Everyone thinks that they can be people or people persons and likable and competent. But I've seen that that's probably the hardest skill to acquire. So which brings us to the question of how do you build it, right? And my one takeaway to you on the people bullet would be, look at the product managers you worked with or that are in the industry and are public figures that you admire. Who are the people that are able to rally along very diverse teams, very cross-functional teams, surely by the power of their words, by the power of their vision. Get people to feel heard, but at the same time provide clarity and provide a path forward. And as all of you pointed out, there's numerous functions. And one lesson I learned early on in my career is it's always the product manager's fault. So don't be under any delusions here. As a PM, you have to be able to say that if things go well, we did it. If things go wrong, I did it. And you have to be able to have the humility to stand up when something fails on the product and learn from it and make things better for the next time. So I put together a really quick chart which hopefully should summarize the 3 types of people skills I think you need to build, right? Pretty simplistic diagram. Assumes there's a CEO, there's a head of product, head of engineering, head of business. I'm sure there's a ton of other functions I'm not listed here. Upward management, alliances with your peers, and then leadership to your immediate team. So let's go through each one. But let's pause on this slide. I break it out a little more on the next one, but let's pause on this slide. Upward management. As a junior PM, I underappreciated the importance of upward management. I thought as long as I'm doing my job well, as long as I'm committed to doing the right things for my user or for the business, everything else will just follow suit. I'll be successful. It is so important to build a relationship with your executive team. It's not to override your manager's authority. It's not to go behind anyone's back or back channel anyone. But it's really so you can have a better understanding and a fuller perspective of why certain things are important. You're never going to be in a place as a PM where you have perfect information because you're always going to be working with other functions. And so working with your executive leaders gives you the ability to get that broader perspective. It also is a great way to set expectations and to make your leaders aware of the challenges that they may not be exposed to in their day-to-day because their head is in the clouds. And so setting expectations, proactive communication, and even understanding what are the goals of your manager, what makes your manager look successful or look good, and therefore how can you help him or her. All of that is what I would consider upward management. Alliances. Alliances are critical in a company because as a PM, you are depending on a lot of people to do what you need them to do so you can be successful. And the only way to do that is by defining mutual goals. As a PM, it's really important to put yourself in the shoes of your engineering partner or your design partner or your business partner and look at why they would want to do the things that you're requesting them to do and frame these as joint goals. Let's take an example. Let's say that you're a PM and you have an eng manager, and the two of you are trying to scope a particular feature and see whether it should be done and how long it will take. One way to approach the conversation is like, hey, from a product perspective, I think this can be really impactful to our business. From your perspective, this could be a really cool opportunity for your engineers to, get their hands dirty and learn and experiment and build their resume on. And when you frame things in a way that's healthy for both sides, you form alliances. Alliances also depend a lot on trust and reciprocity. So if you are asking someone to do you a favor, be willing and open to do the same for them. If you're asking someone to support you in a big meeting where there's going to be contentious topics brought up, be willing to do the same. So alliances depend a lot on offline relationship building, and there's various ways to do that I won't get into, but don't undermine those. And then last but not the least is leadership. Again, won't dwell a lot into that because I think we've talked about it a lot today, but one of my leadership philosophies is, again, aligning a team on goals and problems, but giving them autonomy and solutions. Everyone wants to believe that they have the horsepower and the capacity to come up with great ideas, and you need to make the teams feel empowered by giving them the right guardrails, giving them the right resources, and then hearing them out and giving them the space to do their best work. So that's on leadership. We're pretty much done, so if there's any other questions, I can take them now. Yeah.
One question. So, let's say, how do you deal with the people that won't listen? So sometimes maybe some management or even your manager, by say, you provide some solutions, some suggestions, you align with the team, they think this is the right way to go. However, the people who need to review the solution say, no, don't do this.
So the question, just for those of you who couldn't hear it, is how do you deal with situations where your team has gone off and done a bunch of work and they've come back with their ideas, but then you present that to upper leadership and they say, no, not happening, not aligned. There's a few different ways. I'll give you an example. I was all set to kick off H2 planning on the 15th of April. I gave my PMs a roadmap and I said, these are the milestones, here are your goals, go run with it. On the 16th or 17th of April, I understood that there's going to be some strategy shifts. And as a consequence of that, I didn't want PMs to do any throwaway work. So I actually shifted the entire planning cycle out by 2 weeks rather than have them go and kick off their planning. So the meta point here is make sure your teams are aligned. Before they go down the path of ideation and planning, make sure they're aligned on what they're solving for. Make sure there's very tight clarity with your leadership or with executives on what are the problems we're solving, what are the goals we're trying to achieve. Give those as constraints to your teams and then have them go run with their ideation. That reduces the chance of throwaway work or of things coming back which are not aligned significantly. But let's say you do all of that and you're still in a situation where the initiatives being proposed by your team are not aligned with where executives want to take them. I think that's where you need to build an attitude of resiliency within your team. You need to coach your product managers as a product leader that you're not always going to be able to get your way, and you're not always going to have all the context you need to make certain decisions. So there will be cases where you'll be able to run with it, and there will be a small number of cases where you'll be asked to do something and work on a certain initiative, and you have to be able to take that in your stride and run with it, because sometimes everyone has good ideas and sometimes ideas can come from top leadership. So I'd say a combination of both, where you first of all set upward management expectations on giving the team the space, second off align the team on goals, but third off also build a culture of resiliency within your teams. Yeah.
How do you package information upwards so that management can decide whether product design should get more money or marketing should get more money?
usually try to be as objective and data driven about that as possible. Which means that as we go through the planning exercise and we go through the framework I shared where we do high, medium, lows on investment. So when I say investment here, I'm not just talking about engineering investment, I'm also talking about product, design, marketing investment. And so if we come up with a list of initiatives and then we come up with a list of investment needed, and we see that we're not going to be able to do certain things with the resourcing we have, that's where I make a case and say, here's our stack rank list, here's where we can draw the line based on our resourcing, but if you want us to do any more, then here's how much more resourcing we need. That's usually how I make the trade-off, because if you go about it any other way, it comes back to this information that's needed. So I try to be as objective about it as possible. I feel like I'm not answering your question though.
No,
Is that fair? Have you been in situations where that didn't work?
no, I'm just trying to figure out like people above me need to decide like how you trade off development of your part and then more ad spend or more sales team.
Got it, I see. So this is less about the product roadmap, more about funding functions where you might see ROI not in the product roadmap but in other places. Yeah, got it. I think it's a good question. I'm also not sure the product managers are the right ones to make that call. Because in product decisions, typically you're responsible for saying, here's the impact we could have with this number of engineering, PM, UX, data science resources. But it starts to involve functions that product is not usually representing here. It becomes a higher level conversation on why is sales important or why is marketing important. And at that point, I think the cross-functional leaders have more context on why that's the case than product managers do usually. That's my experience, but I could be wrong depending on the situation. Yeah.
How do you translate very abstract goals that you may get from leadership into something very tactical that your teams can execute on?
Can you give me an example of an abstract goal?
Let's say customer centric, for example. Or just, I think there might be more to that.
Yeah.
I'm just maybe oversimplifying it. But
Yeah.
let's say you want to be the leader in say such and such industry, or you want to set the best experience possible for your customers.
Right.
Is that too vague? And if you have ever been in that situation, how would you sort of give it more structure and why?
Got it. Yeah, it happens. It happens all the time where, sometimes because of time constraints, sometimes because, leaders have just not thought of goals the same way that you have. The goal you get is very vague and amorphous and you need to define it. I'm generally a believer in SMART goals. Anyone here use SMART goals? Okay, so SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And whenever you come up with goals, whether it's for your personal life or career development or a product strategy, I found that asking yourself whether the goal is SMART would usually make sure that you're, defining a well-cut set of goals. And so to your question, if I were given the mandate of go improve the customer experience, I would actually take the time to sit down and break it out and come up with maybe 5 different goal options and then go back to my leader and say which one of these resonates the most with what you had in mind. And then really encourage them to help me take a SMART goal and before I share that with my team. Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned in one of the process framework that you do planning twice a year, right?
Yeah.
So, and do you have cross-functional dependencies in your current?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, right? So, do you follow scaled agile or scaled agile framework or just simple scrums? The reason why I ask is, in that PI planning is generally done every quarter. So, with that, the process planning that you have twice a year, would you do PI planning only, every 6 months instead of every 3 months, or?
Yeah, I currently do planning just in 6 month sprints because the quarterly planning tends to be a little expensive, but it really depends on the function and the size of your team. Because in smaller companies and smaller teams where are very scrappy, you might not have visibility to do 6 month planning. You have to be scrappier, and so it makes more sense to do 3 month planning. In larger companies, sometimes even if the company is very large, you still want to do quarterly planning because that's the only way to stay on top of all the moving parts. Um, so it really depends. I wish I could give you a single answer, but it really depends on the company and the context, and you need to adapt the general framework and timelines to what works for you.
One just additional to this question is, you mentioned you have 4 pillars, right?
Mhm.
To your product, is it the whole product framework of 4 pillars, or there are other pillars as well, which is outside of your organization?
So when you say 4 pillars, which 4 pillars are you referring
I
to?
think you mentioned probably you have 4 pillars where the PMs work on each of the pillars.
Ah, okay, got
Instead
it,
of
got it. Yeah, so I actually have 5 verticals, as I call them, but they also go by squads, sub teams, team of teams, various names for them. So is the question that whether other PM leaders also use a similar?
Yeah, I was trying to assess if there are other pillars which would have cross-functional dependencies, then how would you still scale doing every 6 months planning instead of every 3 months planning?
I see. Um, Got it. So if I understand the question right, like if I have, for example, a partner in marketing and they are doing their planning at a different cadence than I am, then how would I adapt
Yes.
that?
And those are important as well from
Yeah,
product
of course,
perspective, right?
of course. So usually the functions that I represent in the planning process are engineering, product, design, and data science. Those are the 4. If there are asks to marketing, to business, that usually I need to be flexible to understand what their cadence is. Sometimes they're aligned, sometimes they're not. In any case, I think my job as a product leader, and then I work with my PMO partners to identify which functions are important to our success, and then be flexible to adapt to their cadence and say, like, here are our requirements, and then working out a timeline that works for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Yeah.
So what are common reasons for things to go bad? And what are the common failure modes?
Yeah. As much as I want to say something else, it is almost always communication. So communication done well can keep teams aligned, can keep everyone on the same page, can mitigate risks. Communication not done well can lead to surprises with leadership. It can lead to people feeling disempowered, people feeling left out, people feeling, teams not feeling motivated, teams not feeling inspired. So if I were to just catch the big catch-all of things that can go wrong, it almost always comes back to communication. And I think as product people, you are at the hub of doing communication right.
Just following up on that question, I think we mentioned aligning people is very important with like the whole team. So after you've aligned people with what we're doing, why we're doing, and then it's a bunch of, because we're working with all kinds of people. People have different kinds of personalities, and then some people are just super excited, like let's do this. Some people are just like, like they don't want to be excited, they just wanted to do their work. So why is it so important to get them motivated, and then how, what are the best way to motivate people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I recently read a book called Radical Candor, and it touches on how some people at work are what you'd call rock stars, and some people are what you'd call superstars, right? And the rock stars are people that that are motivated, but they don't believe in growing. Like their definition of success isn't to get promoted or to take on increasing responsibilities. Their definition of success is really just take what they're working on and do a solid job of it. So that's why they're rock stars or rock solid, right? And then you have the superstars, who are people who want to advance, who want to grow, who are hungry. For them success is promotions, increased responsibilities, increased pay. And so to your question on why is motivation important, as a people manager, it's really important you understand your team and you understand what each person is motivated by. And what motivates one person may not necessarily motivate another. And you need to find what it is that motivates each of your employees. Your goal as a people manager is to get everyone to do their best work. And if that means that for someone it's basically just coming into work 9 to 5, doing a solid job, doing a kick-ass job of it and going back home, versus for another person really being tempted with the next promotion, it's your job as a people manager to understand that nuance and then to set their goals in a way that will give them what they want.
And just follow-up question. So 2 weeks before the sprint start, you sent over all the requirements mock-up to the engineering manager. So before the committing day, before they committed, how do you make sure they fully understand those user stories, those requirements? That's how they can give you a better estimation, how they can deliver that within this sprint.
So before the pre-grooming, which is what happens before they start committing, the requirement is the PMs have their briefs written up and the UX designers have the UX mock completed. So then the engineering managers use those as references when they are doing their sizing and ask questions offline. But because we require that briefs are done and UX mock-ups are done, there's a good level of thinking that's already gone in for engineering managers to do their estimations based on.
But what if say there are 50, sometimes hundreds pages of user stories there, right? Because building on large scale, how the engineering manager say he won't read through all those details.
Yeah, because you're planning at the level of sprints, which is just 2 weeks, usually your scope wouldn't be that large. It's sizable chunks that can be understood and that can be sized in a 2-week sprint. So even if PMs have got 500 stories or 100 stories, they wouldn't scope all of it for one sprint.
Okay.
Happy to follow up offline with
Sure.
this. So I can be here for a bit and take any questions, but I really enjoyed all the questions that came through. Thank you.